So, Camilla just did something the palace usually never does. She collapsed in public, in front of the very council that had, only seconds earlier, stripped her of the title she'd spent nearly 50 years of her life quietly, strategically, painfully positioning herself to hold. And the reason is honestly more devastating than anyone inside that chamber was prepared for. Because we're not talking about a minor reshuffle of ceremonial duties. We're not talking about a polite reallocation of patronages between senior royals. We're talking about a formal council order, read aloud, witnessed, and entered into the record, that reportedly transferred her status directly into the hands of Catherine, Princess of Wales. And the moment those final words were spoken, Camilla reached for the back of a chair, and her legs gave out beneath her. That's not a fainting spell. That's not exhaustion. That's the physical body registering what the mind refuses to accept. Because to lose a title inside the British monarchy isn't like losing a job. It's not like being demoted at a company. Titles inside the firm are woven into constitutional fabric, into letters patent signed by the sovereign, into a lineage of paperwork that stretches back centuries. Stripping one and transferring it in a single sitting is, according to palace observers, almost unheard of in the modern era. That's not institutional caution, that's an institutional earthquake. Before we get into it, if you're new here on Crown Watch, hit subscribe so you don't miss the updates on this one, because sources close to the council say the fallout is still unfolding hour by hour, and the next 48 hours are expected to redraw the seniority chart of the entire royal household. So let's talk about what actually happened here, because the timeline is pretty revealing when you lay it all out. According to those briefed on the proceedings, the Royal Council convened just after 9:15 in the morning, in a room inside Buckingham Palace that hadn't been used for a formal titles review in more than a decade. The doors were closed at 9:22. No aides beyond principal private secretaries were permitted inside. Camilla, reportedly wearing a soft gray wool suit and the pearl brooch she's been photographed in during almost every major state occasion since 2005, arrived alone. She was not accompanied by King Charles. And that detail, honestly, is the first thing that told the room something was different. Because for years, the two of them had moved through institutional business as a unit. A senior royal engagement, meaning an official duty carried out on behalf of the crown, almost always paired them side by side. But not this morning. At 9:41, according to insiders, the presiding officer read the opening formalities. At 9:48, the first document was placed on the long oak table, and it wasn't the schedule of business Camilla had been briefed on the previous evening. It was a review of titular standing. And here's where it gets interesting. Palace observers say the document had been prepared over a period of 11 weeks, quietly, under a protocol known internally as a title continuity assessment. I know that sounds incredibly boring, but stay with me, because it's actually the key to this entire story. That protocol is what the household uses when a senior figure's public standing is being formally reviewed for realignment. It has been triggered only 3 times in the last 60 years, and in each of those cases the outcome was the same. A title moved. A senior royal fell. The document reportedly ran to 14 pages. It cited a pattern of concerns raised by senior aides across 2 households, correspondence from an auditor attached to the duchy office regarding certain patronage disbursements, and a confidential memorandum authored by a former principal private secretary who had served in the household during the transition years of 2005 to 2011. The specifics of that memorandum have not been made public, but according to sources briefed on its contents, it addressed what one advisor called a persistent misalignment between the projected image and the private conduct of a certain senior royal. That's not nothing. That's the kind of language the palace uses when a decision has already been made and only the paperwork is left. By 10:14, Camilla was reportedly asked to respond. She spoke, insiders say, for less than 4 minutes. She defended her record. She cited her charitable work, her literacy patronage, her decades of service alongside the king. She reminded the council of what she had built, and honestly, that's hard to argue with. She has, by any reasonable measure, transformed her public image from what it was in 1997 to what it became by 2023. That's not accidental. That's decades of disciplined, quiet work. And yet, when she finished, the room reportedly stayed silent for almost 30 seconds. That silence, according to one aide, was the moment she understood the decision had been made before she'd walked through the door. Now here's where the contradiction starts to emerge between what Camilla was projecting publicly and what was actually happening behind closed doors over the past year. On the surface, she had been performing beautifully. She had stepped up during the king's cancer treatment. She had taken on additional engagements, hosted foreign dignitaries, presided over charity galas, and in the eyes of the general public, she had appeared to be a stabilizing force during one of the most medically fragile periods the monarchy has faced in decades, and I understand that instinct too. When you watch someone step into a widening gap, you assume the institution is grateful. You assume that visibility equals security. But here's the thing. Inside the firm, visibility is not the same as favor, and expanded duties are not the same as expanded trust. Because at the same time she was appearing at those engagements, another figure was quietly, methodically, being repositioned in the background. And that figure was Catherine. According to those briefed on the internal planning, Catherine's return to public duties after her own medical treatment was being handled with a level of care that palace insiders describe as unprecedented. Her calendar was reportedly being managed personally by a small team reporting directly to Kensington Palace. Her patronages were being restructured. Her seniority and ceremonial ordering was being quietly elevated in preparation for something. And what that something was, nobody outside a very small circle knew. Until this morning. And here's the detail that changes everything. According to insiders, the transfer of title was not a spontaneous act of council. It was the culmination of a decision that had reportedly been signed off by the sovereign himself weeks ago, which means the man Camilla has stood beside for 50 years, had by all accounts already agreed to the reordering before she'd even been told it was on the table. That's not a family matter. That's a constitutional act performed in private. And I honestly can't stop thinking about the fact that she walked into that room this morning still believing she was there for a standard review. So why did Charles agree to it? Palace observers offer two competing explanations, and both of them, honestly, hold weight at the same time. The first is institutional. The king, having faced his own mortality more directly than any monarch since his mother's final years, is reportedly focused on succession stability above all else. And a Princess of Wales elevated in title and standing is, in the cold arithmetic of the firm, a more secure bridge to the next reign than a consort whose public affection has always been contested. The second explanation is more personal, and it's the one that senior aides are reportedly discussing in hushed tones. That correspondence had come to light. That certain financial arrangements tied to a patronage account had been flagged by an auditor working out of the duchy office. That a folder, reportedly beige, reportedly slim, had been placed on the king's desk at Clarence House in late spring, and he had asked to be left alone with it for the better part of an afternoon. That folder, according to those who know what was inside it, contained more than one uncomfortable disclosure. And here's where the third-party ripple begins, because this decision doesn't just affect Camilla. It reshapes the standing of her own children from a previous marriage, who had reportedly been quietly integrated into certain family gatherings over the last 2 years, in a way that had raised eyebrows inside Kensington Palace. It affects the working dynamic between the two households, which insiders have described as cordial, but chilly for the better part of a decade. And it affects the children, William and Catherine's children, whose futures inside the institution are, whether we like to admit it or not, shaped by the exact ordering of who stands where and who holds what. There was a moment, reportedly, in a private sitting room at Windsor, about 6 weeks ago, when Catherine and Charles were seen together for the better part of an hour. No aides, no cameras. Just the two of them and, according to one member of staff who passed through the corridor, a single folder resting on the low table between them. She reportedly listened more than she spoke. He reportedly removed his glasses at one point and rubbed the bridge of his nose in a gesture staff have come to recognize as the tell he shows when a decision is heavy. And when she left, she did not go through the main entrance. She left through a side door, and she carried nothing with her. That moment, according to those familiar with the household's rhythms, changed everything inside that residence. Now the breaking point, honestly, came this morning at 10:47. Because after Camilla had spoken, after the room had held its silence, the presiding officer reportedly turned the page and read the operative sentence aloud. The specific ceremonial standing associated with her position was, effective from the reading of the order, to be transferred to Catherine, Princess of Wales. The language was clinical. There was no preamble. There was no softening. Insiders describe her hands, resting on the table, going very still. Her breathing, according to one aide, became shallow but controlled. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She reportedly asked one question, and only one. She asked whether the king had signed it personally. And when the answer came back yes, she reportedly closed her eyes for a long moment, and did not open them again for almost 30 seconds. When she stood carefully. She reached for the back of the chair beside her. She took one step toward the door, and that's when her balance failed. According to those inside the room, she did not fall dramatically. She sank, her knees folded, one hand still gripping the chair, the other reaching for a surface that wasn't there. An aide moved toward her within seconds. A glass of water was brought. A physician attached to the household was summoned within 4 minutes. She was helped to a private anteroom, where she remained, reportedly, for the better part of an hour before being escorted out through a side entrance to a waiting car. She did not return to Clarence House immediately. She was, according to insiders, driven to a private location within the Windsor estate to rest. And here's the devastating line, the one that senior aides are reportedly still turning over in their minds tonight. Before she left that anteroom, she reportedly told the woman helping her that she had always known this day might come, but she hadn't expected it to come from the one person she believed would never allow it. That's a pretty remarkable admission from a woman who has, for the entirety of her public life, refused to say anything about her private feelings toward the king. She didn't name him, she didn't have to. And in that single sentence, the entire architecture of a 50-year partnership was, according to those who heard it, reframed. The news reached the wider household within the hour. It reached the media, in carefully managed drips, by early afternoon. And by evening, the coverage had begun to shift in tone. The initial reports focused on the collapse, the physical drama, the image of a queen consort steadying herself against a chair, but by the second wave of coverage, palace correspondents had begun to piece together the larger pattern. The 11 weeks of quiet preparation, the auditor's memorandum, the absence of the king from the chamber, the elevation of Catherine's standing in ceremonial ordering over recent months, and the public reportedly began to react. Outside Buckingham Palace, small clusters of people had begun to gather by late afternoon. Some carried flowers, some carried handwritten notes. One older woman, according to a reporter on the ground, had written a single sentence on a piece of card and pressed it against the railings. It read, simply, that she had believed in second chances. And that detail, honestly, is the one I can't stop thinking about, because Camilla's entire public rehabilitation was built on the idea that Britain, eventually, could offer second chances. That a woman once vilified could, through decades of discipline and service, earn a place. And this morning, the institution she had served reportedly decided that place was no longer hers to hold. The public reaction split, predictably, along generational lines. Older citizens, particularly those who had lived through the Diana years, reportedly felt a complicated mix of vindication and unease. Some felt a long-delayed justice had finally been served. Others felt that removing a woman in her late 70s from a position she had held for less than 3 years was, whatever her past, a cruelty the monarchy did not need to perform. Younger demographics, according to palace observers, viewed it as a natural reordering, a generational handover, a recognition that the future of the crown lies with William and Catherine, and that the institution had simply, finally aligned its paperwork with its trajectory. And both of those reactions, honestly, are holding at the same time in the national conversation tonight. Inside the family, the ripple is reportedly still spreading. William, according to those close to him, was informed of the council's decision the previous evening. He is said to have listened without visible emotion. Catherine, reportedly, was informed the same night, and she is said to have asked only one question, which was whether Camilla would be treated with dignity in the transition. That's a small human detail, but it's the kind of detail that lands emotionally, because it suggests that the elevation was not something Catherine had sought, but something she had been asked to accept. And her instinct, in that moment, was not to celebrate, but to protect the woman she was replacing. Harry, reportedly learned of the decision from a phone call placed by a senior aide at Clarence House. His reaction has not been made public. Anne, who has always been described by palace observers as the most institutionally minded of Charles's siblings, was reportedly present in a supporting capacity earlier in the week, and is said to have signed off on the procedural correctness of the review. Edward, reportedly, was not consulted. And the king himself, according to those close to him, spent the morning at a separate residence and did not receive updates on the collapse until nearly midday. When he was told, he reportedly asked whether she was safe. And when he was told she was, he reportedly said nothing more and returned to his correspondence. That's a pretty remarkable response from a husband. And it's the response that has, honestly, most divided palace observers. Because either it reflects the composure of a sovereign who has made peace with a decision he considers necessary, or it reflects the coldness of a man who has, in the end, chosen the institution over the person, and I don't think we get to know which of those it is. I don't think anyone outside that residence gets to know. But the fact that both readings are possible, that both readings are being seriously discussed by people who have known him for decades, tells you something about the moment we're in. This action, according to those who defend it, was taken to protect the monarchy, not to punish the woman. That's the framing being quietly circulated by aides close to the king. The firm is looking ahead to the next reign. It is looking at succession, at stability, at the arithmetic of public affection, at the long, slow work of preserving an institution that has, in the last decade alone, weathered more storms than any monarchy in modern Europe. And in that calculus, the reordering of a title is not a personal betrayal. It is, they argue, a structural necessity. And I understand that argument, I really do. But structural necessities, when they land on a human body, feel like grief, and Camilla, reportedly, is grieving tonight. There was a moment, late this afternoon, when a photograph was taken from a distance, at the Windsor estate, of a small window on an upper floor. Behind the window, a figure was visible for only a few seconds. She was not looking out. She was looking down, at something in her hands. According to those familiar with her habits, she keeps a small collection of handwritten notes in a leather folder. Notes accumulated over the years from Charles, from her children, from friends who supported her through the decades when the public did not. And what she was holding, reportedly, was that folder, pressed against her fingertips, not opened, just held. That's the image, honestly, that I think will define this story. Not the collapse, not the council chamber, not the read-aloud order. But a woman, alone, in an upstairs room, holding the paper record of the affection she had spent 50 years earning, on the day the institution she had married into decided it was no longer enough. But what this whole situation illuminates is something the monarchy has always struggled to reconcile. That an institution built on duty cannot, in the end, protect the individuals who serve it from the cost of that duty. That titles are not affection. That standing is not safety. That the paperwork of a crown, once signed, moves faster than any human heart can follow. Camilla built a life around the belief that patience and service would eventually be rewarded with permanence. And this morning, the institution reminded her that inside the firm, nothing is permanent. Not even the seat she thought she had earned. She reached for the back of a chair. And the chair, in the end, could not hold her. Before we wrap up, if you want to stay updated on royal family news as it develops, make sure to subscribe to Crown Watch so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.